Hey, Dan Kent here. This is episode 3 of Dan Kent Can Read. That's actually 6. Okay, so episode 3 of Dan Kent Can Read. This isn't Dan Kent Can Count, so just back off. That's all I'm saying. But this week I'm looking at Richard Wright's collection of haiku, The Last Poems of an American Icon. And, I always say I have this kind of I thought that, an interesting person will always create interesting things, whether it's poetry, haiku, songs, movies, books, whatever. An interesting person will create interesting things. And that's definitely the case with Richard Wright. Super interesting guy. This guy, he was born in 1908. He was born to these uneducated sharecroppers. His dad left when he was like 6 years old. So he was raised by his uneducated mom in these cotton fields in Mississippi, basically. And he ended up becoming educated. He wrote a couple books. One of them was called Black Boy. The other one was called Native Son. Both of them sort of document what it's like growing up and living under Jim Crow and living with the constant fear of white power and at the whims of white power and how that affects every moment of your life. And Native Son is a really interesting story because it's about this Black guy who he tries to protect this white woman, ends up accidentally killing her. And of course, the authorities are after him. And it is so suspenseful. And Richard Wright captures that powerlessness of being Black under Jim Crow so well. And this movie it was made into a movie in 1951, I think. And in fact, Wright plays the protagonist in that movie, I think. But anyway, it's super suspenseful and really good. But it really captures that paranoia and that fear that Black people had to carry with them all the time. And these books were really popular, and it really captured that so well that Wright sort of became an early spokesperson for the Black Civil Rights Movement. In fact, he was so prominent that, and he was very influential. He influenced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. actually went to Paris because at this time Wright had fled to Paris, and King went out there to meet with Wright and to have dinner with Wright, and so very, very influential guy and very interesting guy. He ended up living in Paris in exile until his death in 1960. He died of a heart attack, supposedly, but he was suspicious that he was going to be assassinated. And there's a lot of controversy around what actually happened to him. And a lot of people, including his daughter, think that maybe he was actually killed. And but that's beside the point. Looking at a couple of the haikus in particular, especially when you think of like the stress that he was under, the fear that he was under. His mom had just died. A couple of his good friends had just been killed. He was financially destitute. He was broke, living on this farm in the middle of France someplace. And then he discovered haiku. He didn't know about it. He discovered it, and he just found this tremendous piece writing these little 3-line poems. And a haiku is basically 3 lines of poetry, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Kind of traditionally, you want to include a seasonal word in there, but everybody strays away from that. So let me show you some of the goods. He wrote 4,000 haikus in the last 18 months of his life. He collected 817 in this collection. Super cool too, because he typed these out and then he cut them and he put them on these boards in the order that he liked them. And it almost looks like this early version of Twitter, these boards. It's super cool. But let me read a couple of these. The first one, number 3. Keep straight down this block, then turn right where you will find a peach tree blooming. And I just love that because in this little haiku, the peach tree becomes the destination. And the fact that this narrator is giving directions indicates this scene where somebody really wants to see the blooming peach tree. And it's just such a beautiful way of giving attention to something that people probably overlooked and didn't think much of. And I just think that's so cool. Number 135. 6 cows are grazing. The 7th stands near a fence, staring into space. And I think what I like about this haiku is that I feel like I am that seventh cow. That I just feel like that's me. Everybody's like doing something that cows are supposed to do, and I'm over daydreaming, looking at a pond or something. Number 222. Holding too much rain, the tulip stoops and spills it, then straightens up again. And I like this one because there's this whole story in these three lines. I love the motion in this and the movement, and scene one or act one, act two, act three. It's all right there in that little beautiful haiku. I began writing haiku about a year ago, and for me, I am that seventh cow. I am the one who's just always staring off into space, and I'm always daydreaming. I'm always thinking of some abstract thing. In fact, when I turned like 30, I realized that I need to get rid of my motorcycle because I just daydream too much, and I'm putting my life in danger because I can't get out of my head. I start these trains of thought, and pretty soon I'm thinking of these things that are just way out there, and I lose touch with my surroundings even. And so I discovered haiku about a year ago, and what I really like is that writing a haiku, it forces me out of my head and into the world, into the present tangible reality. That's where life is actually lived, not just contemplated, but actually lived. And also, I believe it's where God is. And haiku forces me back into the power of that present moment. And I look and I detect and I observe and I bring in this information and I try to make something beautiful or interesting out of it. And it pulls me out of that fog of distraction in a very sort of enlivening, kind of liberating way for me personally. And so if you are like me and you are absent-minded and whatever, I recommend trying to do a haiku a day. It's been a really great practice for me. I've done about 300. Richard Wright has done 4,000 in 18 months. So I got a long ways to go there. He has 817 in this collection, and I think they're pretty darn good. And I would, if he came out with a follow-up, I mean, obviously he's gone now, but if his family came out with the follow-up and he shared the other, what is it, 3,200 haiku, I would get it and read it. So it's that good. He does a great job of sort of anthropomorphizing things, which we all do as poets, but he also makes these loose associations between things to kind of tie a scene together and to show how all these different things are related, kind of like Van Gogh does in Van Gogh's paintings. Light is intermingled with trees, which is intermingled with the earth, and it just all flows together, and there's this energy between things. And Wright does that with a lot of his haikus as well. Like, for instance, there's one where he talks about the shadow of a sunflower, I think it is, and it's just this hanging sort of sunflower, and the shadow creates this hook-like shadow, which is cast over a lake. And it's just this connection of, like, it's almost as if the shadow is going to be a fishing hook over the lake. And he just ties things together like that so well. I think if there is one criticism I would have of Wright, and it's hard to criticize a person for this, but in terms of just like pure literary critique, he does talk a lot about loneliness. And my own personal opinion is, if you're going to write poetry, yeah, if you want to have a poem about loneliness, fine, but you can't do too much, because most people who are reading poetry, they're looking for an antidote to loneliness. They are lonely. You don't need to describe that's what they're drowning in. You don't need to describe the water that they're drowning in. You need to help them to shore. You need to talk about something that cures them of their loneliness, not glorifies them. So that would be my only critique, is that he does talk a lot about loneliness in here, and I wish that he would talk less about that. Other than that, it's a great collection, and I'm glad I have it, and I do reread it, and I recommend picking it up if haikus are intriguing to you. Until next week, have a good one, and I need like a tagline to end this, like "keep reading" or something like that, but nothing comes to mind right now that's not profoundly corny. So see you next week.